Hey, I can hear myself. Okay, good. Right, so thanks very much for coming today, and more importantly, thanks for not running away as soon as the butties were put away. It was a very nice spread, thanks very much. Shout out to the kitchen. So I'm going to be speaking about SEN today. I haven't actually spoken about SEN in public before. That's mainly because I'm not a huge fan of being pelted with rotten tomatoes. So please, be gentle with me. Some of you may be aware that a few of the things that we do at Michaela are a bit different, are a bit controversial. We don't shy away from controversy here. SEN certainly is no different. So what we do for SEN is, by all means, controversial. I won't lie to you. Yet, in spite of this controversy, it gets results. At Michaela, our SEN pupils make more progress than their peers. In reading, our SEN pupils arrived at the beginning of Year 7 on the 18th percentile nationally. After 3 years at Michaela, they're now in the 55th percentile nationally. Not a single child in Year 9 reads below his or her chronological reading age. Every kid writes long essays in English and humanities. Even a child with moderate learning needs, who was not able to write simple words like dog and farm when she arrived, can now write paragraphs with confidence. Our SEN kids can focus for entire lessons, put their hands up, make contributions, feel secure enough to make a mistake in front of their peers, and have a go at something they find hard, and keep going, even when they find it difficult, especially when they find it difficult. And they don't even throw pens. It's really great. It would be easy to visit the school and make the mistake of believing that a knowledge curriculum, a bit of reading here, a few knowledge organisers there, will be the difference between success and failure for SEN pupils. And whilst those things are absolutely necessary, they are not sufficient. The difference for these kids lies in the culture you create. Over the past few years, I've come to see that culture counts most for SEN pupils. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And establishing the right culture, a truly inclusive culture, is the difference between watching your SEN kids flunk or fly. So I'm going to tell you a bit about how I came to this conclusion, and then about what that actually means. It started a few years ago in a cafe in Notting Hill. It was long before the school opened, and Catherine suggested I apply for the role of Senko. I told her she was mad. She probably was. Probably also still is, I think that would be fair to say. But I said, there's no way I can do this. I'm not qualified. I don't know anything about SEN at all. I'm definitely not the right person for the job. In reply, she told me that, in fact, I was mad, and reassuringly said that she wasn't looking for a ready-made SEN expert, but someone who could train on the job, someone who could get the qualification along the way, learn the most important lessons from being in the classroom with the kids. A few days later, I hesitantly submitted my application. So when I started out back in September 2014, I focused my energies on the usual Senko things, paperwork, organising intervention classes, meetings, making sure I met all the statutory guidelines, and so on. Trying to figure out what the statutory guidelines even were. That was my first job. It was pretty tough back then. But I wasn't particularly interested in all the bureaucracy, if I'm completely honest. Who is? It is pretty much dry as sandpaper most of the time. So I directed my energies to where I thought I could have the biggest impact. The classroom. There was no better place than the classroom, I thought, to learn about what it really took to do the right thing for SEN children. So I got to know the SEN and bottom set kids really, really well. I taught them. I was also their form tutor. So I saw them several hours each week, which I know isn't the same as what you might see in primary, but for a secondary teacher, for me to see them sort of 10 hours a week was really, a high number of hours. I came quickly to know their ways, to really get to know them very well, love their quirks. I felt a real sense of pride when I looked around and saw what the Michaela environment could help them achieve. They were remarkable, genuinely, in many ways. The fundamental culture of the school, that of no excuses discipline, of didactic teaching, knowledge, all of these things did help them to make huge leaps in progress, even with my silly attempts to be a Senko. They read with gusto in lessons, they carefully checked and double-checked their spellings, they put their hands up, desperate to offer their thoughts on the poem or the play or the novel we were studying. They sat up straight, they took part, they listened. And standing at the front of my classroom, looking out at 30 bottom set pupils, I thought, that's great, that, job done, aren't they brilliant? Essentially, that was my kind of ridiculous conclusion. Because that wasn't really what was happening. The truth was markedly different from the stunted version of reality that I had hubristically manufactured in my head. I'd become horribly complacent. The standards I had for them were frankly too low. I took my time in lessons. I let the odd things slip here and there, partly because I really loved them, but also partly because there was a small part of me that thought, well, they're the bottom set, they have needs, they do need something different. They don't need the same kind of diet of high-paced lessons and unrelenting knowledge and drill and practice that perhaps the top set pupil might need. So what I used to spend my time on was, telling jokes, trying to make them laugh, building relationships with them, and indulging my desire to overanalyse and over-discuss the texts in class. I'm an English teacher. But the problem was that left so little time in the lesson for them to actually write about any of the texts that we were studying. And what that meant is that they weren't getting as much practice. But they were the bottom set, after all. Or at least that's how I justified it to myself. So when they took more time to get on with their work, or focus, or listen to me, or stop fiddling, or put their pen to paper, I didn't really demand more of them. Whilst I thought I was doing great, and they were all doing great, and everything was great, it turns out it wasn't really that great at all. And that's the thing with being a teacher. It's easy for the cognitive biases to creep in. One kid puts their hand up in a lesson and says something profound, and it's easy to complacently assume that everybody understands it, that they're all like that they all really, really get it and are totally on board and have got these really in-depth, profound, knowledgeable insights about the text that you're studying. I suppose, some clever people might call that the availability bias. You take one aspect of something because that's available to you and you draw an incorrect conclusion out of that. But I judge my teaching as well on the outcomes of just a few kids, kind of focusing bias. I assume that their relative concentration and improvement would sustain them and would lead to successful outcomes at GCSE and beyond. Kind of the, maybe the optimism bias, one might call that. But the fact is, I thought they were completely amazing in every way, but that blinded me somewhat to the reality. They could do more than I expected of them. Of course they could, but somewhere, for some reason, and it is really hard for me to admit this, and I've chosen to do this in front of all of you, God knows why, but here I am. And the fact is, maybe part of me didn't really believe in them enough. So one day, Joe Kirby waltzed into my classroom. I'm not sure he actually waltzed. I think he just kind of oafishly blundered in at some point. And he looked at my classroom with more objective eyes. He spotted a few things that I would subconsciously overlook. Some kids hadn't done enough writing, for example. Some kids didn't always put their hands up to answer questions. Some kids were coasting along, spending more time looking out the window than reading the texts. In some lessons, the languishers at the back had barely managed to keep up with their notes. I'd been blind to the flaws of my own teaching and my own classroom because I was too damn arrogant to notice it. I was too convinced that our great relationships and their relatively good performance confirmed that I was doing a good enough job. But when it comes to SEN kids, those kids who come in years behind their peers for myriad reasons, is it ever possible to do a good enough job? Do we want to settle for good enough, or do we want to raise our expectations even higher? After that conversation with Joe, I went home and I had a long, hard look in the mirror. It was utterly soul-wrenching, like someone had challenged me to my very core. Tough feedback, as Joe said earlier, is hard to take at the best of times. But when it's about teaching, something that's so personal, something that's so central to who you are, it's really easy to brush it off, believe me. Just think, well, Joe Kirby's an idiot, what does he know? And ignore it. And that was my initial response. Change that. But that's much easier than actually going away, genuinely introspecting, and confronting the brutal reality that you're not good enough. The truth. I do hate the truth sometimes, but the truth was that I needed to be better for them. If I really meant it when I said that I wanted to do the very best for them, I had to face it head on, roll up my sleeves, and do something about it. That was back in 2014. A few years later, we're closer to where we need to be. And even though our SEN pupils do well by pretty much any measure you want to throw at them, there's still loads we can do to improve. I feel like somewhat of a fraud standing up here telling you how I'm going to build an inclusive culture in a school. But hey, that's never stopped me before, so I'm just going to do it anyway. So what can be done, in all seriousness, to try and build a truly inclusive culture in a school? Step 1. Go and observe a top set class. How much writing are they doing every lesson? How much reading? How many questions are they answering? How focused are they? That's what you should be aiming for. Whatever you see in that room, that is what you should be aiming for with your bottom set kids. The truth is, they need even more practice than the kids in the top sets. At Michaela, if a kid is struggling to learn new things in maths, for example, we don't ask, what's wrong with that kid? He must require some kind of assessment and a label to be attached to him immediately. We asked, well, how much have they practiced it? Have they been doing extra maths homework every night? Have they been 100% focused in every single lesson? Have they missed any lessons? What is their attendance like? Are they listening to everything the teacher says? If not, what can we do to close that practice gap? We speak to them, we get the parents in, we get their form tutors to talk to them, we prioritise checking in on them first every lesson. Practice and making sure that every kid gets as much practice as possible. That is our first port of call every single time. If none of that works, then we look at giving them extra lessons, shifting things around the timetable, calling on reinforcements from other members of staff. We move mountains to make sure that every kid gets as much practice as they need. In an inclusive school, there is no such thing as a practice gap. And when I say more practice, I'm not just talking about drilling them in times tables. If a kid struggles to concentrate for more than a few minutes, for example, they just need more practice at it. They need more reminders. They need more opportunities to learn how to stay focused. A habit coach to guide them through it and help them stay on the right track and stay in the room. They need their teachers to have the highest expectations of them, of their every action, and never to make excuses like I did for their lack of energy or effort. Step 2, ditch the labels. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Labels are damaging. A label is a millstone around the child's neck. It moves the emphasis away from what I've just said, that there's a practice gap that needs to be addressed. Instead, a label condemns a child to a life of, well, that's because I have this issue, or, oh, well, that's because he's got that issue. Labels reduce children to nothing more than some medical term, or worse, a pseudo-scientific neologism that means nothing, and more importantly, does nothing to help them get better at the things they struggle with. Ditch the labels, the burdensome self-fulfilling prophecies that only drag kids down, and they will be raised up by the knowledge and self-belief that comes from feeling that disadvantages are irrelevant. We can't help where we come from or control our starting points, but we can empower ourselves to focus on how we move forward, and that is exactly what we should do for our pupils. Step 3. Pick up the pace. Now I shall draw upon the wisdom of one of the greatest sages of educational philosophy. He's been mentioned already today. It's the one and only Mr. Bart Simpson. Upon entering his new class for struggling pupils, he sought clarification by asking his teacher, so let me get this straight. We're behind the rest of our class and we're going to catch up to them by going slower than they are? If it sounds silly on The Simpsons, then why are we doing this in our schools? If we slow down the pace for the weakest, they won't stand a chance of winning the race. Speed it up, give them more, and watch them joyfully revel in the success and sense of achievement that comes from working bloody hard and achieving something amazing. In every lesson, people sit in rows, all doing the same work, all at the same pace, with one teacher at the front, coaching them through it with endless enthusiasm. Throw as much content at them as you can, and you'll find that much more sticks than you expected. Believe that they can do it, and eventually they will. I recently received a call from CAMS doctor, Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, who couldn't quite believe how well a child with ADHD had settled into the strictest school in Britain. He really used to struggle to focus, she said, her voice stuttering with astonishment. I know, I said. He found it hard here at first, but we kept going. And that is what it comes down to, more than anything else. Believe in them. Believe they can do it. And I mean really, really believe it, and get your staff to believe it too. Ditch the labels, drop the paperwork, increase the practice, reduce the chaos, reduce the noise, increase the rigour, do more reading, do less group work, stop differentiating, stop talking about labels, stop worrying about Ofsted, stop worrying about your SLT, raise the standards you have of them, raise the standards they have of themselves, get rid of the spreadsheets, stop obsessing about bureaucracy, just roll up your sleeves and teach them. Believe in them more than you ever did before. Take a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror and ask whether your expectations really are high enough. Confront the brutal reality and take the hit. Put your kids above your own ego and do what's best for them. Give them the kind of education you'd want for your own kid, and do not skimp or save or hold back. Never let a misspelling or a mispronounced word go by. Never reduce the challenge in the curriculum, ask fewer questions, or expect less writing at the end of the lesson. Never, ever reduce your standards, and most importantly, never lose sight of the unshakable faith in the belief that every child can do it. Thank you. Okay. I feel very cleansed. I feel very cleansed. I've just got it all out of me. You know, it's been 3 years of holding back on that. So thanks very much for listening. Any questions? The roaming mics are ready. Yes, sir, there.
Young kid.
Hi.
Sorry, is that on?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
It's not specifically linked to SEN, but I'm just thinking, you mentioned that when you observed then Joe Kirby came and you said that there weren't enough hands going up. I just wonder what your idea about hands up or a school. I mean, there's a faculty with a no hands up policy. So what would your thoughts be regards that? I mean, you're picking with your school, you were knowing every kid's name for a no hands up policy.
Yeah.
That worked pretty well.
So the question was, I mentioned not children putting their hands up in lessons, and the gentleman was just asking about having a no hands up policy and what I think about that. I think that children want to show you when they know the answer, and often, you know, there'll be 32 kids in the class, 30 of them will have their hand up, and I'll pick, you know, little Johnny at the front who hasn't bothered to put his hand up. Because obviously I do see the value in cold call, but I think you need, as a school leadership team, you need to give teachers the autonomy to make that decision, and you need to give children the ability to express their enthusiasm. And I think that having a no hands up policy really quashes that enthusiasm, and I wouldn't really want to do that. So it's lovely to walk into the classroom and see, you know, Mr. Taylor saying to his bottom set year sevens, when was, I don't know, the Battle of Hastings is literally the only date in history I know, so sorry. You know, and them all kind of desperate to give him an answer and to say that it's 1066. It is, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, if I were you, I would go back to my school leadership team and say that is an incorrect decision, and that they should change that. Any more questions? Hello, yes, this man here in the lovely shirt.
Hi, thanks very much. You referred a little bit to setting during your talk.
Mm-hmm.
So is setting something you advocate at Michaela across school subjects, and you think that's how far do you think that's a valid way for inclusion to be effective?
Great question. So the question was about setting. We do set here at Michaela. Do I think that's valid? Yes, absolutely. I suppose the reason I think that's valid, we actually stream the pupils, so they're in their tutor group, which is set by ability, predominantly by maths, but in year 7 when they struggle with reading, we take reading more into account, particularly at the lower end. So there's 4 streams, and they're in those lessons for all the time together. So there's a couple of reasons why I think it's really, really good to stream. Firstly, the sense of team that it gives them. They feel very, very closely bonded to the other pupils in their group, their form tutor, their teachers. It's a much closer knit group, particularly in year 7. It's much more like the primary model, so I think it makes the transition to secondary much better for them. But secondly, it kind of links to what I was saying about giving them more time, giving them more practice. It is obviously going to be the case that your bottom set, you know, I'm just using that term for want of a better term, but, you know, the weakest pupils in the year are going to require a bit more practice than the top set kids. So it seems foolish to me, it sounds like it would be a bit of a nightmare for a teacher to have to differentiate in that way during the lesson. We don't really differentiate at all in lessons, only but I suppose by support, and differentiation really happens structurally, and setting is one of the ways in which we achieve that. So we can give the bottom set an extra hour of English, we can give them 2 extra hours of maths, or whatever it is you want to do with them, and you can stretch the top set by giving them more science or more French, for example, so they get really, really good at languages, and so they could perhaps, enter a subject, they can do triple science, for example, and all of those kinds of options, timetabling wise, are available if you stream. So that's why we do it. So great question, thank you. It's good for us to be able to explain that. Let's have, the lady back there. Thank you.
Hi. When
Hi.
we talk about ditching labels,
Mhm.
as a primary practitioner, we find that parents are often desperate for a label to explain their child.
Yeah.
How did your parents react?
So the question was a brilliant question. I'm really glad I get to talk about this. Parents. So parents often, particularly in primary, pursue a label. I mean, look, I am not afraid of telling people the truth. You may have gathered that Michaela, we don't shy from the truth. I would say to a parent, I would be honest with them, and I would say, look, you need to realise that the impact of this label is that it's going to affect your child negatively. And I would say everything I've just said to you. I would explain that it's going to drag that child down. It's going to be a millstone around their neck. It's not going to give them the support. I would explain that, and I'd be honest about that. And also I would say, look, yes, you've got a kid who struggles. Yes, you've got a kid who can't focus, and he's been called ADHD or whatever it is whatever label you want to ascribe to that child. But the fact is that just him having the label isn't going to make your job easier as a parent. If anything, it's going to be harder if you focus too heavily on that label. What you need to do as a parent is ignore the label and do, more to support your kid to get into the right habits. So honesty with parents, and I have been very honest with parents, because we do have that even in secondary. There have been instances where parents come in and say, well, he's got this issue or that issue. But I say, trust me, these are the things that we do. This is the reason why I think the label is a bad idea. This is what I think we should do instead. This is what your part is to play. Let's work together. And you know what? It works. They come round. I'm very persuasive. Any more questions? Any from the internet?
Got loads, Katie.
Ooh.
How important are support staff to your vision for SEN? Do you have fewer than similarly sized schools?
How many SEN kids do we have?
Oh, that's unclear.
So what proportion? Sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay, question 1. How important are support staff to your vision for SEN?
How important are support staff to our vision for SEN? It depends what way you mean. We don't have TAs. We don't have Velcro TAs or anybody in the back of the room supporting. I think they become a hindrance when you've got 32 kids sat in rows facing the front. I would much rather spend that money on more teachers. But we do use that for, we overstaff, for example, in subjects where pupils do struggle. So maths, where possible, although, finding maths teachers is not always easy, but we found some very good ones. And so, for example, there's Tom Kendall sat in the audience somewhere, and he pretty much half his salary comes from one of our SEN pupils who's a delightful child who needs really lots of support, and he has extra lessons one-to-one with Tom. So that's what we spent our money on, a qualified maths teacher who can really support him with maths, and that's helped him to make huge gains in progress. So rather than support staff in the traditional sense, additional staff is what I would advocate. Definitely. And what was the second part of that question, Sarah?
Well, it's a good point. I don't know whether they're talking about support staff or SEN, but they say, do you have fewer than similarly sized schools?
Well, 0 support staff, so probably. But, who knows? And in terms of SEN, our SEN is about average. So it's in line. It's an average for the borough and nationally-ish, around that mark, but it changes. And we do actually manage to take children off the SEN register. So there are lots of children that come to us in year 7 with these, like backpack-sized SEN files and get thumped on your desk. And, by the end of the year, they're not SEN. So it fluctuates very frequently, which is why I'm being quite vague, essentially, because I need to update my spreadsheet. Any more questions? Yes, this gentleman here. Thanks, sir.
Hello. You mentioned you said ditch the paperwork. Inevitably, some children's statements, EHE plans, and school support, they do come with paperwork. How do you manage that effectively?
Okay, trying to make sure I'm honest but not too honest here. Look, you've got to do what needs to be done. That is my short answer. Sorry, the question was what do you do about paperwork? Because children do, with statements, come with paperwork. Do what needs to be done. So you pop the IEP in place, you do the cost of provision map, you do the EHC paperwork when the time comes. But I don't do any more than that. I mean, in the SEN files that I get, I can't believe the amount of time some SENCos spend on absolute rubbish. There's all of these charts that have just, all the stickers that the kids have got in 1 week when they were in year 1. I mean, I don't think I really need to know that, to be honest. So I just think minimise. Don't do what isn't necessary. Focus your energy on getting those kids into lessons as much as possible, listening in lessons, focusing in lessons, learning as much as they can. That's what you need to spend your time on. If anything, I see my role as SENCO not so much as a bureaucrat, but as somebody who helps other teachers to understand that culture and to kind of drive that culture through and making sure the culture is as strong as it can be. Should we? Yeah, sure, this lady here. Got a bit of time.
You mentioned not having lots of additional resources for your SEN students. How will that impact? Has that made a difference to things like examinations? So students who are able to have readers or extra time, 25%, 50% extra time, do you do anything different in examinations? Is that something you will consider when they get older and get to GCSE, or is that something that, again, you think your students won't need?
Good question. So the question was about exam support, extra time, readers and so on. We're only at the end of year 9 now, so of course this hasn't come up yet. Loads of things to plan for GCSEs. Yes, I would still advocate that some children get extra time. Readers, I kind of have different feelings on readers. I don't think that's the best thing for a child with SEN sometimes, because I think it becomes a distraction, and I would much rather to train them in the 5 years we have them to be able to read the exam paper themselves than to have a reader read it for them. And scribes, again, I mean, I'm reluctant, but we'll see. I mean, I would take it by each kid. That tends to be my approach, just look at each case by case basis. We've got our first exam actually next year. Our pupils are entering religion GCSE a year early, so we're looking at that over the next few months, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. How are we doing for time? We've got a few more minutes, but I appreciate that I'm standing between you and a break, so I don't want to keep you for too long. Should we take one more from the World Wide Web?
Yeah, choosing a good one. Surely there are barriers to learning that additional practice on its own can't overcome. Are there times when a different approach altogether is required?
So sometimes, I would say the pupil with the biggest needs that we have at this school is a girl who I use as an example a lot. And if you come to visit the school, you will have met her at some point, particularly if you've taken the lift, because she's always in the lift. She has a number of different needs that I won't go into, and she is different. I mean, she would struggle in mainstream. That said, she does 6 hours of English with Joe Facer every week. She does 5 hours of humanities with Joe Allen every week in the lesson, where she sits there, she slants, she does the reading, she takes the notes, she keeps up, like I said earlier about, throw lots of stuff at them and stuff will stick. So I think you can still have those kids in mainstream as long as there is then some extra support outside. So again, she would spend time outside of lessons with teachers doing extra subjects with extra lessons with her that are more specialised. So she does more kind of reception year 1 level phonics, for example. She does a speech and language course with some of our amazing languages teachers, and they do a really, really great job. They've done amazing things to help her improve her syntax. But that's one kid, that is literally one kid out of 360. I can't see us ever needing to do that with any other kids we currently have. Of course, we don't know who we're going to get in the future, but it's a very, very, very small percentage. And even then, they can still be in mainstream school, and they can still be in mainstream lessons. So, it's not that they should be completely excluded. And actually, that said, I'm not saying that children shouldn't go to special schools. I believe that parents should have the choice. Not every parent wants to send their kid to Michaela. Not every parent wants to send their school to mainstream. I get that. Fine. If her mother turned around and said she wanted to go to a special school, that would be absolutely fine by me. But obviously, when we've got her in our school, we do the best that we can for her. Okay, shall we leave it there so that we don't all die of heat overload? Thank you. Thanks. That was fun. Cheers.